we worked with the customer not too long ago to deploy across their cloud. They had all the tools you'd expect from a mature security team in that environment. We deployed over a couple of days across their public cloud environment, deploying it as some of the pieces I've mentioned, right? Some infrastructure, some keys, the sort of pieces that a threat actor would go after. And I think it was 2 days after deployment, we got the first detection.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Reminding you, please hit the like and subscribe button because we have another great guest today. And if you want us to keep bringing you this kind of content, play with the algorithms, hit the damn button, do us a favor, appreciate it. And then without further delay, want to introduce you to Mr. Andy Smith. He's kind enough to join us this afternoon. Andy is the CEO and co-founder of Tracebit. We're going to learn a little bit more about his organization. It's a cybersecurity company that's building deception technology and essentially very sophisticated honeypots, if you want to think of it that way, or security canaries across the cloud infrastructure. We're going to have Andy explain us a little bit more in depth about that. But before he got to Tracebit, he was head of engineering at Tessian. And this is a very apropos topic. I mean, we're getting into third-party risk. We're getting into a lot of events that have made the news today. So, Andy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Look forward to having this conversation.
Amazing. Manoj, thanks very much for having me. Really, really excited to dig into it with you today.
So give us a little bit of your background. You know, other than the little blurb I had, I mean, who is Andy Smith and how did you end up in this line of business?
Sure thing. Yeah. So I have been tinkering with computers and cybersecurity, I think since I was around 10 years old. That kind of, typical kind of like hacker mentality of kind of wanting to understand things by breaking them, I would say, is something that's kind of been in me from an early age. My dad was in computers, and I got access to one fairly early, and was very quickly kind of interested in like the internet and topics around like hacking and things like that. So it's been like a fascination of mine since I was a kid, basically.
Oh, and did you practice hacking? Were you a gray hat ever in your life?
I mean, to some extent, yes. I think, what I would say is I think today, if you want to learn computer security, you have a lot of resources available to you. You can spin up all sorts of virtual machines and testing environments that make things a lot easier. What I would say is it wasn't quite as easy back then, but you could certainly do some of your own experimentation on your own machines.
So I would love to get, since you started so early, I'd love to get a little bit of your insight on this one topic, which is the one thing that most defenders get wrong. In fact, I'll say all defenders almost, because I have yet to find one that got this one right, is to actually get into the mind of the hacker, right? Having that mindset. They seem to be very tool-centric, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I mean, people are tool-driven, tool-centric, and they do well what they know how to utilize. But with some rare exceptions, but primarily in the defense agencies, where they actually try and understand the mindset of the adversary, the motivations of the adversary. Why is very little focus put on that topic, it seems, in the training of a cybersecurity professional? It's almost an afterthought.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I mean, what I would say is, it wasn't long before I sort of migrated from like breaker to builder. So, the past kind of 15 years of my career have actually been in software engineering rather than offensive security. So, I would not necessarily like place myself in like some like elite red teaming bucket or anything like that. I do find a kind of buy this story that like attackers think in graphs, and that's not necessarily how defenders are modeling their estates. It's about chaining together those different exploits it's a trope, right? But that, you just need to make one mistake for someone to get in. I absolutely do think that way. Yeah, I mean, I was definitely kind of a child of reading and consuming like literature around the likes of like Kevin Mitnick and social
Yeah.
engineering and these sorts of folks, right? And I think it's very natural for defenders, and I've played the role of a defender to get excited about the exciting tooling, the exciting attacks, and often it does just come back to the basics, right?
So what good does all this technology do then?
Yeah, it's a good question. You do want some technology placed together to stop pieces getting through, right? Like Tracebit was founded under this assumption that you have to assume breach. No matter what you do, someone is going to get in. Like as long as those computers are switched on, and accessible by humans and plugged into networks, you have to model under the assumption that someone is going to get in. But I do think from like a mitigation and defense point of view, it makes sense to invest in some reasonable array of technology to reduce the probability of those threats getting through.
It seems that the threats have become much more aggressive in their implementation. I mean, look for example, the Jaguar Land Rover, probably the biggest cyber attack in history because the bailout was so massive.
Yep.
With
impacted
that.
the UK's GDP.
Yeah. And you think an organization like Jaguar Land Rover doesn't have one CISO. They probably have multiple CISOs across various divisions. They probably have every tool known to mankind deployed in that organization. Yet they suffered one of the greatest catastrophic failures of cybersecurity in recent times. Is there any hope of stopping something like that from happening?
I mean, I think that the stance I would take is I don't think there is hope in guaranteeing that the threat actors will never get through. I think what's actually really, really important is we need to build systems that are resilient to the possibility that can and will happen. I think the risk can sometimes build in when we build systems that are brittle. When we talk with customers all the time about building big walls and assuming that no one will ever get in, and that works great until someone is unfortunately able to hop over that wall in with a way that you didn't expect or anticipate. And the counsel we would always give there is, it's really about investing also on the other side of that wall and ensuring you're able to respond quickly, eject, limit the blast radius. That's just as much a part of it as the defense piece.
And Andy, I'm so glad you said that. That's brilliant, because that's the part of the equation that oftentimes gets neglected, I guess, for lack of a better word. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You should have the proper cybersecurity hygiene in place, but you should also know that at some point a breach is going to happen. I think it would be foolish in today's day and age to think that you're not going to get hit. Question is, have you built that resilient infrastructure in place where the outcome is operational continuity? Do you get to preserve that when things go wrong? And I'm glad you daylighted that, because that is something that we think we've been on that message for a long time. And we think if enough people say it, then maybe someone will start listening, but we're always surprised. So, you had a firsthand experience to a third-party breach. I mean, what was that experience about?
Yeah, so not something I can go into a tremendous amount of detail, but I was at a previous company. I was responsible for the security program until we brought in a security leader. So I was kind of building the product and securing the product was part of my role. We were keeping email data in our cloud environments for our customers that we needed to protect. And yeah, without sharing too much detail, we got quite close to a supply chain attack that attacked a lot of folks in the industry, and actually went undetected for quite some time. So the kind of origin story of Tracebit was we'd explored deception technology, security canaries as a control to implement this idea of a assumed breach, and we'd basically come to the conclusion that the only for our modern cloud native environment, the only piece that really made sense to us, the only way we'd implement this successfully would be to build it in house. And to be honest, we did not get as close to building that in house as we'd wanted to. We actually kicked the can down the road on that project. And without sharing too much, in response to this incident, we when we were digging into it, we realized that actually had we gone and built this out, it was something we would have actually caught months earlier than we otherwise did. So that was honestly that was the spark that led to the founding of Tracebit. I thought if we'd have got value from this, others would have done.
So tell us a little bit about the space Tracebit sits in, because deception technology has been around for a long time, right? I mean, right, and we haven't seen a huge focus on it like we have in other areas, especially anything with AI in front of it.
Yeah.
That's a separate topic. Tell us a little bit about the space.
Sure, and AI is part of it, honestly. So the history of deceptive technology is fascinating, and I think there's a famous book that I'm sure your listeners and yourself are aware of, like Cliff Stoll's Cuckoo's Egg, which is arguably one of the first documentations of a cyber crime taking place. In that book, Cliff, or I think it was his partner actually, they had this idea to basically build a honeypot to detect this Russian threat actor. So they basically laid a trap, something that appeared to be an attractive resource within the university network, that they then used to study and detect the threat actor in the environment. So I think that was in the early 80s when the kind of the first ideas around like deception technology in cybersecurity came around. Obviously, prior to cybersecurity, it goes a lot further than that. Decoys have been used in warfare for hundreds and hundreds of years. As an industry space, there has been excitement and waves of excitement in the technology over the past, I would say, 15 to 20 years. I think if you were RSA 8 or 9 years ago, there was a time when the kind of the floor was covered with deception vendors, and that's not the case today. We are one of the few kind of modern deception vendors that's growing fast in this space. We see things different this time as they were in the past. Honestly, there's two kind of parts to this. One is like cloud environments. So
okay,
if you speak to folks who deployed deception in the past, who bought these vendors maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago, the kind of what you'll hear over and over again is that these were very, very heavy weight to deploy. We've met people who had teams of like 3, 4, 5 individual contributors just keeping these things online. They were often actually shipping like racks out to you to go and install into your data center. This is very heavyweight, and if you think about it, if we want to go and spin up, we have like a large complicated network back then, and we wanted to have a chance of catching a threat actor in that network, we might have to spin up hundreds or even thousands of servers, of virtual machines. That has a cost, right? There's CPU, there's memory, there's disk. That has like a very, very non-trivial cost. Not just the creation, but also the maintenance, the ongoing operation. It also introduces risk and complexity into the environment, right? You say to a CISO, hey, I want to go deploy 500 virtual machines into your network. Not only are they thinking about the expense of running them, they're also thinking about patch management, the third-party software it's going to run. All of these pieces that come into place. Our approach, and honestly, why we founded Tracebit and felt now was the time to spin up a company in the space, is very, very cloud focused. So when you look at the cloud and you look at serverless technology, there's a very different story when it comes to creating deceptive resources. So as an example, if you take an AWS account, within an AWS account, you have secret manager secrets, you have S3 buckets, you have IAM roles. If you like zoom into the Kubernetes clusters in that account, you also have service accounts, you have secrets, you have pods. You have a lot of resources that actually are actually the public cloud providers cost and responsibility in many senses. An S3 bucket is basically free to create from a financial point of view. There's no patching going on. There is, but Amazon Web Services are doing the patching under the hood, and that's kind of what you're paying them for. And then if you want to scale and deploy a lot of these resources in those environments, we're at a point in the industry where most platform teams have aligned behind a small set of technologies to do that. So, for example, Terraform is pretty much the de facto, I would say, at this point for managing large, complicated cloud environments at scale. So these are kind of some of the technology shifts that we got very excited about when we thought about building a deception company today. Because if you take a large, complicated AWS environment as an example, you could actually deploy tens, hundreds, or thousands of S3 buckets, secrets, Dynamo tables, IAM roles, et cetera, in that environment without introducing a significant cost, without introducing a maintenance burden. And then the outcome that you have is many, many, many tripwires around that environment for some of your most critical resources for when a threat actor does compromise that environment. The other piece before I pause is actually we have been leveraging LLMs over the past few years for this, because the other piece when you speak to teams about the pain points of the past deception vendors, especially for large environments, that configuration and deployment and decision making was a big part of it, because you have to go and say, okay, well I have this, I have my prod PCI compliance environment over here, and this has a particular naming scheme, and it's all in this region. And, we've got this project name called, Project X. And obviously, for you to be likely to catch threat actors in that environment, you need to go and match all of your deceptive assets to those resource names. But security teams are notoriously under-resourced. And the idea of them picking through every single environment in an organization and getting creative and coming up with great names and configurations that are going to tell a believable story for threat actors, I'm sure you can already imagine just how much work that would be. If you take LLMs, it turns out they're actually really, really effective at this. Unsurprisingly, right? So what we'll do is we'll take metadata from a customer environment. We'll understand how a resource is named, configured, where are they located. We'll leverage an LLM to come up with canary resources, deceptive resources that are tell a believable story from that environment, deploy a range of different resources, some that are particularly attractive, some that just look like all the other resources. But ultimately, this is something that you can actually effectively scale across very, very large enterprise environments. So those are kind of the two key pieces, like technological shifts for us, that meant we thought it was worth building a company in the space today.
I get why do it. Now, let me ask the counterpoint on that is that with the advent of AI and its daily evolution, isn't it going to be just like we had malware that could detect it was running in a sandbox environment, or it had been sandboxed and it got very good at making sure it wasn't leaving tracks that would sandbox it?
Yep.
Right. Yeah, isn't that the same thing with Canaries now, where it's going to be like, okay, you know what? Why can't the AI detect the canary in the coal mine in the first place and say, I know that's a canary and I'm not going to even go bother to tag it because it's too obvious. Nobody puts anything out there that's, as an example, I'm making that
No, it's a really good question. It's a really, really good question. So I think there's two parts to the story. So one, actually, that is another big advantage of cloud environments, right? So the old way of doing things, you were emulating network services, and emulating network services is inherently fingerprintable. There's always going to be some little fraction in the TCP handshake or something on the banner or some signal that lets me go, aha, this is a Linux box pretending to be a printer. Or, this isn't really an FTP server, it's someone's Python implementation of an FTP server. There's always going to be that detail you can dig into if you get deep enough. And I agree. LLMs are going to be really, really good at digging into that PCAP data and making that assumptions and, spinning up their own test environments for the real stuff and comparing. Like, I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't gone that deep on the network level pieces. I think there's some value there, but I don't think that's kind of where the sweet spot is. If you compare that to cloud resources, an S3 bucket in an AWS environment is an S3 bucket in that AWS environment. There's nothing emulated or fake about it. And if you're trying to fingerprint that, if you're trying to say, what's the real one and what's not the real one, there's actually only like a handful of properties that actually exist when you create an S3 bucket. There's the name. Is it using encryption? What type of encryption? Is it using versioning? What's the IAM policy? And all of these pieces, we can emulate. We can fairly easily like mirror when we're creating them. And then also, like, on top of that, obviously, if you need to go deep on that S3 bucket and you need to kind of go inspect it further and look in the content, that's the point where you'd actually go and trigger the canary. So that's part of it. So that's why I think cloud is a really, really suitable place for deception. The other part that I think is even more interesting, actually, is when you think about there's studies out there. There's the Tularosa study is a really interesting one, which compared. They basically took a number of groups of expert red teamers and tested the psychological impact of deception upon them. And long story short, and there was a number of results, but long story short, there's some indication that if a pen tester or a red teamer believes there's deception in the environment, they're going to be slower and less effective at reaching their goal. Some examples, they find a key, they find an opportunity to escalate privileges, and they avoid it because they think it's a deceptive resource, even if it isn't. They sometimes think that's too good to be true. I'm not gonna go for it. Or they don't do as much enumeration as they would normally do because they're worried about setting off the canaries. There's all sorts of different reasons that this affects them. So we're actually working on this research at the moment, and asking the question, well, what about LLMs? Like, are they right. do they mirror that behavior? And our early
and that was going to be my next question, but so thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So our early indications are that yes they do. So you have situations where because they are informed of the presence of deception in the environment, just like a human would. There might be attack paths that they don't explore because they're concerned that they're going to set off the deception. They can take longer to explore the environment. They can be less aggressive on enumeration, and they could also just skip real paths altogether just because they believe it's deception. So the short answer is I think it's pretty hard, regardless for LLMs to do that fingerprinting. But then also, actually, what we're seeing is that there is some psychological impact, or psychological. It's obviously not actually psychologically impacting them, but there does seem to have a similar effect on LLMs environments.
But for that effect to take place, the attacker would have to know beforehand that there's some, right? Otherwise, and most attackers are, especially the ransomware crowd, that's a lazy group of people anymore.
And so your point being there that, how would they know? Would they even research
They won't. They're just doing ransomware as a service. They're just hitting up people to see who falls. I mean, not all cyber attacks are like that. Don't get me wrong. Right? There's people who take their time and they case out the operation and they have a very set objective. But the vast majority of attacks that take place don't fall into that category. Most are, can I get a couple bucks out of these guys and move on to the next?
Yes, definitely. I would say, though, that if we're going to assume that in the future, which to me completely checks out, a lot of these attacks are going to be fully automated through LLMs. I would also assume those LLMs are going to do their research ahead of the attack, right? It just makes sense, like if I was going to be plugging one of these things together, I'd at least say, let's go look at the job ads and see what tech stack they have. Let's go and read, do they have a security policy? Let's go and do these pieces, because that's going to make me quicker at getting to my goal, right? I'll use fewer tools, or at least know how to prioritize my toolkit. So this is why we are actually massive proponents of being very public about your use of deception technology. This definitely splits opinions, but we're one of the few deception vendors out there. If you go check out our website, you will see customer case studies. You will see our customers talking about where they put deception, what the value they got from it was. This obviously doesn't go into like a huge, tremendous amount of detail that would allow someone to go and pick that deployment. And I would say, a key part of what we're doing is heavy, like ongoing automation. So where deception was today in a customer environment, it may not be tomorrow. We're moving these things around. It's a moving target. But yeah, this is exactly why we're big proponents of talking about this publicly. And so that's my view there, right? I think the LLMs will do some degree of exploration, and if they do that, they'll come across that information.
I could see why the split is there. I mean, on the one hand, if you declare you're using such technology, then it might act as another layer. Deception technology might act as another layer in a defense in depth architecture because you are slowing down movement of the adversary in a way.
Yep.
I could also see why tell them anything at all. Let them see what they go and grab, because like if I'm a organization that has a target on my back, and there's umpteen industries where that is certainly the case, I would, if I was their CISO, I'd be operating under the premise that we have been breached. We just don't know it yet.
Yep, 100%.
Right? Because in most of these organizations, the attack surface is so large, it's almost impossible to defend the entire attack surface. And the biggest thing is you can't alter human behavior. That's the biggest gotcha. I mean, if people actually started behaving properly and didn't just randomly click on stuff and do things, we would have much less a problem. But that's not going to be the case. That'll never be. People love pictures of cute kittens playing with yarns, and they'll click on it and ba-bang. Things happen. Can having deception technology in an instance where we assume we operate under the belief that the premises has been breached already, we just don't know it, can it accelerate the detection? Can it accelerate the effectivity of our red teams, if you will? Can we find it faster? And if so, how?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, I think that the majority of our customers are operating under that assumed breach philosophy. I would say that, I don't think this necessarily needs to apply to just large enterprises, and I especially think in this day and age, supply chain attacks that we're seeing as of late, even small organizations that aren't being targeted and have a relatively tight setup. The idea of a dodgy Python or Node package ending up on a developer's laptop is just fairly safe bet at this point in time. In terms of can deception kind of speed up that post breach detection? I think I could share like a really interesting anonymized customer story
Okay.
here, where we saw a lot of value. So we worked with a customer not too long ago to deploy across their cloud. They had all the tools you'd expect from a mature security team in that environment.
Sure.
We deployed over a couple of days across their public cloud environment, deploying it as some of the pieces I've mentioned, right? Some infrastructure, some keys, the sort of pieces that a threat actor would go after. I think it was 2 days after deployment, we got the first detection, and we were not involved in the incident response. That was handled on the customer side, but a few weeks later we caught up with them, and long story short, it transpired that it was a service account that had been compromised. It had actually been compromised for a significant amount of time. So a lot of the anomaly detection that they had been using in that environment to detect unusual behavior wasn't going off because the same threat actor was returning from the same set of IP addresses and performing the same set of behaviors. But in
Then
this
somebody
case,
must have clicked it as being legit too. That
back in some time ago, possibly, yeah. I don't know. I don't know the kind of root
because that's what happened in the
of that.
Target breach.
But yeah, in this case, within 2 days, we were able to detect a latent compromise in that environment. And
so you were a secondary check against the SOC then.
we were feeding into the SOC, and we generally would be being consumed by the SOC. But yeah, we would be that detection that for when the other tools don't quite do what you're hoping they would do.
See, that's something I had not considered. That could be a very interesting layer to add, because you think about the amount of creativity that's going into avoiding detection, especially the really good hacking outfits. They really engineered these attacks, and they do a good job of it. I mean, it's not, they just do a good job of that. A lot of times, especially if they know what SIM you're using, and they are able to engineer ways around detection of that SIM platform. So potentially, I'm just thinking out of the box here, you have something like Tracebit that is a unbiased observer, if you will, that is the secondary warning that says, hey, wait a minute, even though you don't have any lights turning red on your screen, there's something really wrong here. And something that overcomes the confirmation bias that's inherent in SOC operations, if I said that right.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely think so. We also hear from folks who work with, when they do read about an incident hitting some peers or in the news or something that could be affecting them, the fact that we haven't got off is a really positive signal for them. It's not going to lead them not to run an investigation. It's not going to lead them not to do that threat hunt. But that is the thing when they're frantically logging onto their laptop at 3:00 in the morning. The fact that they know the Tracebit Canaries have not triggered is a big plus.
Now, is Tracebit being run completely in the cloud? So is your service cloud native 100%? So there's no local agent installation or anything of that?
So I've actually, all the examples I've focused on so far have been, I've been talking about public cloud. We go into a lot of other places. So another popular deployment is workstations, end user devices. So we can push credentials and soon artifacts onto those devices. So we've been mentioning the supply chain attacks. That's obviously like a really nice detection. CI/CD environments is another really popular place for us to go. And in the future, we want to head outside of public cloud into more like typical like SaaS environments. So think Google Drive, think O365, SharePoint, these sorts of systems. Today we're not in anything on-prem, but that is also something we're feeling a little bit of pull for. But I do still think there's those challenges I mentioned earlier around the weight of the deployment and the fingerprintability.
Yes. Well, the fingerprintability is the thing that I'm thinking about, is that the thing with cloud native solutions, they're really cool. But if I can figure out what are the IPs of the servers and things that you use, what infrastructure you use, and as a hacker, I want to see if there's any communication back. I don't even have to guess if there's any canaries out there. What I want to see is anybody talking to the infrastructure. And if they are, then there's obviously canaries in the environment.
Yep. Yes, I think we do go to a reasonable amount of effort to limit the ability to detect Tracebit in the environment. Obviously, we still do hold that position that folks knowing Tracebits in the environment is probably a positive, not a negative. Where we are focused is around them being able to easily enumerate, which are and are not the Tracebit canaries. That would obviously be a negative if it was easy for them to go pull that list somehow. We do have like public customer stories where there have been red team engagements that have been aware that deception and Tracebit are in the environment, and part of their goal has been to, let's say, make it from a developer laptop to a production database, whilst avoiding deception, and Tracebit being in a scope for that evasion. And we've been able to detect them. We've been able to place enough tripwires in their way that basically detection has been unavoidable for those red teams.
What are some things that people do that make the deployment of deception technology less effective?
It's a great question. I think the big one for me is the initial deployment. I think folks get quite focused, on what good looks like today. And I think this is kind of from and I think because I come from a software engineering background, and like maintenance is 80% of the work. I think like focusing on actually what does good look like in an ongoing deployment of deception. To give you a really simple, concrete example, and this is something we see in here from customers fairly often who've like rolled something themselves, or they've tried to start with something simple. You go and deploy some Canary tokens to your end user devices. So you put some AWS keys on your end user devices. Maybe you write a script and you roll these out. Something we've heard this like far too many times now from customers. The beauty of deception is it doesn't go off very often. It's not going to be pinging your SOC every couple of weeks or every couple of months. And we met folks who they rolled out Canary tokens across their estate, and then it was really 18 months before they saw something. So they got that trigger. Hey, on this particular device, someone has hit a Canary token. The question then comes, okay, well, when did that token leave the device? And the token has an infinite expiry date, and it was placed on that device 18 months ago. Well, the answer is it could have left that device at any point in the last 18 months, right? It could have actually left that device the day you deployed it. Someone could have accidentally shipped that off to their home PC, and it could have sat there for that whole time. And then finally, their personal email address or whatever, got compromised. We just don't know the answer to that question. And then the question comes up, what do we do? Do we even have telemetry for 18 months? Do we even have that data? Are we even going to go and do that digging?
Right.
And often the answer is no. So I think a mistake is thinking about like keeping that like feedback loop and that deployment as tight as you possibly can is something I'd really. And we have some writing on our blog about this. And you don't have to buy our product to do this. You can just, if you're going to roll it yourself, it's just think about this up front. So a simple solution to this is automate the deployment of those Canary tokens. So you push them fresh ones down every 24 hours. So if one of those triggers, and it was on that device, you have that really tight time window to go and run that detection. This also has other nice benefits, like that the 18-month example that was deployed manually. Well, now someone needs to go and deploy that. They need to go and deploy that fixed manually.
Right.
You've just delayed some technical debt the security team now have to deal with. And maybe if it was one trigger, it's not so bad. But what if a supply chain attack hit all of your developers and it just lit up 500 laptops? Well, now you need to go and think about doing that manual rolling of keys. So yeah, I think really like what does good look like in the long term is really I would always counsel folks to think about quite deeply before they embark on such a project.
Have you built a lot of automation into your platform so that, as the example you gave, you can automate the rolling out of various Canary types on a regular basis and on a randomized basis, if you will, not even a regular basis, without invoking an IT maintenance person to go and make sure it gets done?
Yeah, exactly. That's basically every time we go after a new platform and we go and implement a new module, that is one of the main questions we're always thinking about. And sometimes if we can't automate and the maintenance, we may not go after it because we don't want to create that burden. The big piece we do this is in cloud environments, because we're as I mentioned earlier, we're pulling back metadata to profile and understand these environments so we can create realistically named resources. That's an ongoing deployment. So if you spin up Project Canary in your a production environment, Tracebit's going to recognize that. and we're going to go and say, hey, let's go spin up some other resources with that same name. Similarly, if you wind down a project, we'll wind down the Canaries for that name, because they're no longer relevant. If someone had an intimate knowledge of that environment, they may detect it as a canary, or it may even cause some confusion.
Now, do you have any examples of your technology being used to actively monitor bad actors? So where, as opposed to shutting them down, you're actually tracing those canaries, and where are they going? Or what are to get an ideation of the intention behind the compromise, and maybe feed them intentionally bad data?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is something we're exploring. It's not something we have like where we'd like to go is like chaining multiple canaries together, so that you can create.
Okay.
You can imagine someone downloads a file from an S3 bucket, then that file has a reference to a URL. You hit that URL, that has a form that's believable for the particular industry you're in. You can then perform actions on that form. Imagine all of those pieces, and imagine that them all being canaries and us being able to thread that together. We don't have that in the platform today. Like we've been really focused on that high fidelity detections. That is our focus today. Folks buy our product because they want to detect threat actors without significant amount of noise. Why we're exploring the deeper piece there is because we've made those detections, and then we've been asked the question, great, they downloaded a file. Like, I'd love to know what happened next. That would be really helpful for my investigation. And so that's where we're going with the platform. It's not what we have today. Your question actually did trigger another example that I've not really touched on, but is worth worth sharing. As we've mentioned, AI. The other really interesting way we've been used as a measure for customers is measuring like AI agent use and misuse on user workstations. It may come as no surprise if you place a lot of AWS keys or SSH keys or other keys that allow lateral movement or use of tools on workstations. If someone is running an AI agent like a Claude code in quite an aggressive way on their device, they will very likely hit those keys. So we've had customers that have been able to use us to basically measure and understand where these agents are being used. If we had a customer recently say to us, I had no idea the sales team was using Claude code until I saw a canary detection on their workstations. So that's just an example kind of way we're being used to like measure an expected behavior in environments that isn't traditional threat actors, but is still providing those high fidelity detections.
Interesting use case. Let's say that. On the traditional side, do you have any metrics by chance on reductions in dwell time of bad actors where your technology is in play, Andy?
Yeah, that's a good question. The honest answer is we're actually working on some of those pieces at the moment with customers. Okay. I don't have any concrete like public data that I can share there.
Yeah, that would be very cool, because those dwell times have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. And if they eat the canary first, that's relevant and material.
Yeah. I mean, the example I shared earlier, right? There had been a multi-year dwell time that we were able to detect in 2 days. There are sort of case studies like that, but that kind of bigger data set is something we're still collecting.
Is there a particular set of industries that have taken to deception technology and have really embraced it?
I think if you look across the industries outside of our customer base, it includes manufacturing, it includes finance, it includes healthcare, it includes technology companies. Those are the ones that stand out. By function of the tech stacks that we are built for. If you look at our website, you'll see we're working with a lot of like tech forward tech companies, just because they're most likely to be big adopters of the big clouds and these sorts of things. But yeah, we're seeing kind of the industries that generally invest in security seem to be adopting deception.
Yeah, I was thinking critical infrastructure, but a lot of that is still very traditional. It's very heavy on-prem still.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of private cloud deployments. To me, that is like one of the biggest gaps in security in a lot of environments is the critical infrastructure, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of those environments are breached. It's just no one's found them, and everyone who has breached it, I'm sure, is lying low and not doing anything until the time is right.
Yeah. So here in the UK, the NCSC, who are kind of the UK's CISA, they actually, I think it was 18 months ago now, they've started like a call for like UK government, national infrastructure, and just UK organisations in general to adopt deception. So they're big fans of deception, and national infrastructure, critical national infrastructure in particular, is something that they're kind of pushing on, going and adopting deception.
Are they able to get funding to push deception? I'm curious. And if so, how did they do it? Because maybe there's a lesson we could learn.
Well, I think often in the UK the budgets are a little bit lower than the US in general. They certainly have. They've shared a bunch of this publicly. They certainly have resources behind it. They have a team of people working on this. But I believe that's something they're kind of trying to encourage to happen, kind of between those businesses and entities.
Well, Andy, we're pretty much at the hour. We wanted to give you a couple minutes here in the end to talk to our audience about anything you'd like to let them know, anything you want to plug. So it's your floor about anything you'd like to discuss with them.
Thanks so much. And yeah, really, really appreciate the questions and conversations. I've really enjoyed it. The piece I'd love to call out is we launched back in December a community edition of a product. So, I'm hopefully you've been banging the drum enough here that, we think this is something everyone should be doing. We think this is a really valuable technique. So yeah, I'd really encourage your listeners to go check out community.tracebit.com. And there they can sign up. We have, an install that can run and deploy Canary tokens on your workstations. We also just launched, in response to some of these supply chain attacks that are happening, a GitHub integration. So we can actually automatically inject Canary tokens, SSH keys, things like this into your GitHub action workflows. So if one of those were to get compromised, you'd be able to go and detect it. So, and hopefully there'll be even more features coming soon there.
Fantastic. Well, as things develop, Andy, stay in touch.
Certainly will.
If you've got something new to tell us, you're always welcome back.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for doing this, Andy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the great questions. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Take care.